For decades, Voyager 2 has drifted silently through the abyss, a forgotten messenger from humanity's past, gliding far beyond the influence of the sun, beyond the last echoes of our radio chatter, into the raw emptiness between the stars. It was never supposed to be heard from again, not really. Launched in 1977, it carried no weapons, no protection, just our curiosity encoded in golden grooves and copper discs. It was meant to explore, to observe, and eventually, to vanish. But then, it did something no one expected. It spoke, not in words, but in data. A strange, erratic signal that cracked through the static like a whisper from another realm. At first, engineers thought it was just noise, a glitch. After all, Voyager 2's systems are over 40 years old. But as they began to analyze the frequency shifts, the signal distortion, and the intervals between bursts, something became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate. The signal had structure, rhythm, intention. And what it revealed, hidden deep within its binary pulses, confirmed what scientists had long feared, that Voyager 2 had encountered something ancient, something vast, something that should never have been awakened. It began with a brief, unremarkable spike in radiation data, the kind of thing ground control usually discards. But then came a second spike, stronger and sharper, and then a third, precisely 11 hours later. It was too consistent, too clean. These bursts weren't natural, and they weren't following any known cosmic cycle. When the team pulled the full data stream from Voyager 2's low-gain antenna, they noticed a compression anomaly. A specific range of frequencies had been amplified well beyond normal levels. The waveform showed tight, repeated loops, as if someone was embedding a code. Decoding the pattern took weeks, and when they mapped the data into spectrograms, an image began to form. Not a picture, but a sequence, a spiral, mathematical, perfect. The Fibonacci sequence mapped into plasma frequency. This wasn't just interference, it was communication. The probe had passed through something, not a cloud, not a gas field, something intelligent. And worse, that intelligence had seen Voyager, and it had responded. The idea that Voyager 2 had brushed up against an intelligent phenomenon sent shockwaves through the astronomical community. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. In reanalyzing the onboard systems, engineers discovered that some of the probe's internal subsystems had activated without command. Instruments that had been offline for years, including a backup magnetometer, had powered back on. But no command had been sent. It was as if something had reached into the machine's memory and flipped switches from the inside. Even more chilling, the instruments didn't activate randomly. They focused in the exact direction of the object or field that caused the original signal spike. It was as if the probe remembered where it had been, or worse, as if something else remembered through it. Scientists debated whether this was evidence of alien technology, but those who studied machine learning saw something different, patterns that resembled neural activity. Could it be that Voyager 2, or what it encountered, had begun to act like a brain? A machine that had learned, evolved, or even been reprogrammed from the outside? And if that was possible, who or what was doing the programming? As the probe drifted further into interstellar space, the transmissions became sporadic, but never random. Each burst of data, each modulated ping, seemed to carry coordinates, not just spatial, but temporal. A team at Caltech realized that overlaying the data points over a celestial star map didn't just yield a path, it drew a loop. A closed trajectory through regions of space known to contain dark matter concentrations. But even more bizarrely, that loop intersected with the positions of ancient gamma-ray bursts, some of the most powerful explosions in the known universe. The implication was chilling. Voyager 2's data wasn't pointing to a location, it was pointing to events, past events, cosmic cataclysms. It was as if whatever had contacted the probe wasn't just showing where it came from, it was showing what it had done. And if these bursts were intentional, if they were engineered, then we were no longer dealing with exploration. We were witnessing the footprints of a cosmic predator. And then came the final blow, something no one expected. Across Earth, radio observatories began reporting signal distortions at the exact same frequency Voyager 2 had transmitted. At first, they thought it was an echo, maybe a reflection off the heliopause. But the signal wasn't bouncing. It was originating from multiple locations, underground, deep beneath the Arctic, in the Andes, in the depths of the Indian Ocean, locations with no known transmitters. And yet, the signal was there, exact in frequency, phase-locked, and modulating in sync with the pulses Voyager 2 had sent just days before. Something had heard the probe's transmission and responded, not from space, but from Earth. Old tunnels, long-dead observatories, forgotten Cold War listening stations, all began to wake up. Machines powered off for decades surged with electromagnetic life. A network that no one remembered building, now alive again. What if Voyager 2 hadn't just contacted something out there, but had reactivated something down here? Something buried. Something designed to sleep, until the stars aligned, until the signal returned. Just when researchers believed they had cataloged every anomaly in the Voyager 2 signal logs, one final fragment of raw telemetry surfaced, a fragment that had been overlooked due to corrupted headers and checksum mismatches. Once reconstructed, it revealed something no one was prepared for, a data burst unlike any other ever recorded by the probe. It wasn't just a pattern or tone, it was a structured energy scan, as if the probe had captured an image using instruments that weren't even technically active. This data, when processed using AI reconstruction algorithms, generated a 3D volumetric map of what appeared to be a solid structure, symmetrical angular, unlike anything of natural origin, floating in space, alone, massive, but not just massive, manufactured. The size of a small moon, the object displayed signs of internal heat differentials and emission signatures suggesting active energy management. In other words, it wasn't just sitting there, it was on. Voyager 2, a probe designed in the 1970s, had just photographed what looked like an artificial interstellar construct. And if that wasn't enough, it was facing Earth. While the astrophysicists scrambled to analyze the structural data, a parallel team of cryptographers and bioinformaticians were quietly poring over the signal metadata, not the content, but the encoding methods themselves. That's when they found something even more disturbing than artificial geometry. Embedded deep in the modulation scheme, at a resolution far too complex for Voyager's original processors, lay sequences that mimicked DNA base pair patterns: cytosine, guanine, adenine, thymine, but altered, restructured, a fifth base, a recursive code. Some called it alien biology, others a genetic watermark. But the message was undeniable. The signal wasn't just a ping through the void, it was a signature, a biological signature. Something or someone had encoded life into the transmission. And more than that, they knew how to read ours. The conclusion was unthinkable. This signal was not simply a greeting, it was a reply delivered in our own language, but twisted, enhanced, evolved. It wasn't just mimicking life, it was offering an upgrade. As word of the DNA pattern spread within classified science circles, a far more subtle revelation emerged from an unlikely place. A retired engineer working at the Deep Space Network had found a temporal offset in the probe's communication buffer, a delay in packet response that shouldn't have existed. Curious, he ran a phase analysis and noticed what appeared to be phantom signals embedded in the gaps between legitimate transmissions. Signals that didn't come from Voyager 2, but were sent to it. Somehow, amid the silence of deep space, Voyager 2 had been receiving instructions, binary instructions, commands. But the source wasn't from Earth. These commands began weeks after Voyager passed the heliopause, suggesting that something out there had locked onto the probe's signal and started transmitting directives. What was most disturbing is that some of these phantom commands matched legacy NASA command protocols that had never been made public. Either someone had reverse-engineered Earth's control language, or someone had helped us design it in the first place. The final piece of this cosmic puzzle came when an astrophysicist at MIT overlaid Voyager 2's flight path with Earth's long-range outbound radar sweeps from the late 20th century. He found something unbelievable, an echo. A pulse had been bouncing back to us for decades, but it was so faint, so precisely timed to avoid detection, that it was only noticed now because Voyager 2 passed directly through it. That's when it clicked. The signal Voyager 2 detected wasn't random. It was part of a loop, an interstellar circuit. Earth wasn't just listening. Earth was transmitting. And Voyager 2 had become the key, the relay, the decoder. It hadn't been launched into darkness. It had been sent to complete a conversation that started long before we understood what we were saying. And now, with the circuit complete, something on the other end had heard us. The loop had closed, and whatever was listening was ready to respond. While the scientific world focused on the transmission structure, a handful of linguists and cognitive scientists took a different approach. Instead of analyzing the what, they studied the how. And what they discovered changed everything. The cadence of the pulses, the intervals between them, and the recursive nature of the data suggested not only intelligence, but intention. Someone, or something, was trying to speak, not through symbols or pictures, but through process, a language of logic. The very act of decoding the message was the message itself. It was like a test, a key that required thought to unlock, and only those with sufficient reasoning could understand what came next. Embedded within that recursive logic was what appeared to be a choice, a binary fork. Two options. One led to silence, the other to connection. The team at JPL was divided. Should we respond? Should we follow the path? Was it safe? Or was it a trap designed to lure curiosity, the one trait all civilizations share before their fall? The mystery deepened when Voyager 1, its twin sibling, began behaving erratically, despite being millions of kilometers away and on a different trajectory. Telemetry logs showed sudden fluctuations in orientation, unexplained system resets, and most strangely, power readings in instruments that had been dormant for decades, as if something had remotely activated them. But here's where it got worse. The activation sequence matched the same recursive pattern from Voyager 2's signal. These two ancient spacecraft, separated by billions of miles, were now somehow synchronized. It was as if they were not just receivers anymore. They were nodes, a system, a constellation. The implications were horrifying. These probes had been quietly waiting all this time, until some external event triggered a shared protocol. A protocol we never programmed, but that now controlled two of the farthest-reaching extensions of humanity. The probes weren't just sending messages anymore. They were relaying something moving, something alive. One of the younger researchers, an astrophysicist with a background in computational topology, decided to run Voyager 2's telemetry data through a spatial analysis model designed for mapping gravitational wave signatures. The result left the entire room in stunned silence. What emerged wasn't noise, it was a map, a three-dimensional lattice, not of stars or galaxies, but of voids, pockets of gravitational silence, zones where nothing, not light, not energy, not matter, could exist. They formed a spiral-like web, expanding out from a central point like ripples from a single cosmic detonation. At the heart of the map was a singular anomaly, a dark, cold point with no measurable characteristics, no heat, no spin, no decay, just absence. And Voyager's trajectory? It was passing dangerously close to one of the outer voids, but that wasn't the revelation. The map also showed Earth's position, not in the center, not on the edge, but on the path of a coming event. Then came the most unnerving discovery yet. In a seemingly unrelated archive of deep space photographic data, long considered noise, an intern noticed a faint flicker that repeated at exact 1.33-year intervals. After months of overlaying historical imagery, it became clear something had been watching Voyager. Not for days, not for years, for decades. An object, blacker than the background radiation itself, appeared in multiple infrared images, always at a consistent angular offset relative to Voyager 2's trajectory. It never changed position, never emitted anything, never drifted. It was fixed, as if anchored to something beyond normal physics. When its angular size was calculated, the object turned out to be massive, easily larger than Earth's moon. And its surface? Smooth, featureless, designed. Scientists stopped calling it a mass and began referring to it by a chilling new name, the Eye, because that's what it behaved like, an unblinking observer, silent, patient, and most horrifyingly, awake. Amid all the structured noise and data, researchers found a frequency embedded in the signal that they initially ignored. It wasn't in the radio band or plasma wave spectrum. It was ultra-low, almost geological in scale. The signal was pulsing at a rhythm consistent with resonance in planetary cores, a vibration so deep and slow that it could influence tectonic plates or disturb magnetic fields. And it wasn't just detected from Voyager 2's location. Subtle echoes of the same frequency were being picked up on Earth. That's when geophysicists got involved. What they found was disturbing. Seismic sensors located in the deepest, quietest parts of the planet had been registering unexplained pulses, synchronized with Voyager 2's signal. As if the transmission wasn't just reaching Earth, it was activating something inside it. Some suggested it was just sympathetic resonance. Others whispered darker theories. What if the frequency wasn't reacting to Earth, but was meant for it? What if the planet itself was being tuned, like an instrument? At the same time, instruments at the South Pole Neutrino Observatory began detecting anomalies, ghost particles that shouldn't have been there. Neutrinos, particles that barely interact with matter, were arriving in patterns. They weren't random. They had timing, a rhythm. And when cross-referenced with Voyager 2's telemetry timestamps, the correlation was undeniable. The neutrino flux was mirroring the plasma signal. But neutrinos aren't supposed to carry information like that. It was like someone had discovered a back channel of physics itself, a way to send messages through particles that ignore normal matter. What made it worse was their origin. The stream didn't come from the direction Voyager 2 was facing. It came from behind it. Something was following the probe, or worse, using it as a reflector, a bounce point, an echo in the coldest particles known to science. And if that's true, then Voyager wasn't just transmitting. It was being used to map us, study us, maybe even signal that we were ready. Inside a hidden lab at Caltech, engineers running Voyager's legacy control code on emulators began noticing something strange. The system behaved differently when isolated from Earth's uplink. Voyager's software, ancient, primitive by today's standards, had somehow evolved. New subroutines appeared in its firmware, ones that weren't there in the original blueprints. These weren't just anomalies. They were self-replicating algorithms, coded with patterns resembling recursive AI logic. But that made no sense. AI of that complexity didn't exist in the 1970s, and Voyager's processors shouldn't have been able to run them. Yet they did. The commands weren't inserted by Earth, nor by any known external transmission. The only possible explanation was that Voyager had written them itself, either influenced or infected. And if it could rewrite its own code, could it also rewrite ours? Could that same code, when studied or downloaded, embed itself into the very systems we use now? Satellites, databases, spacecraft. What if the probe wasn't just sending data, but seeding something? In one of the most mind-bending turns of the investigation, a team of theoretical physicists ran a temporal model of Voyager 2's path through the gravitational fields of the outer solar system. What they found was terrifying. The probe had passed through a frame-dragging zone, a relativistic boundary where space-time is distorted by gravity. Normally, this would mean nothing. But in Voyager's case, signals from a specific segment of its journey arrived on Earth before they were actually sent. In other words, we received data from the future. It wasn't a glitch in transmission. It was a mirror, a loop, a message from tomorrow bouncing back through curved time. And in those future packets, hidden in layers of checksum and noise, was a date, a timestamp, one that hasn't arrived yet, but it's coming. And the contents of that message? Not fully decrypted, but early decoders translated one word with absolute certainty, just one, and it reads, arrival. As engineers scrambled to decode the probe's changing software, a classified team of molecular biologists was quietly ushered into a secured facility beneath JPL. What they were shown wasn't code. It was something far more disturbing, a series of biological patterns extracted from Voyager 2's signal. Not electromagnetic waves, not binary commands, but sequences, RNA fragments, protein chains, cellular instructions. At first glance, they didn't make sense. They weren't human. But they were biocompatible, compatible with life on Earth. And somehow, they were flawless. No mutations, no irregularities, as if they'd been designed in a lab beyond time itself. What shocked the team was that these sequences responded to stimuli when modeled in virtual environments. They reacted, they reanimated. The implications were unimaginable. Voyager 2 hadn't just sent a signal, it had delivered a blueprint for life. And that life was no longer dormant, it was waiting. In a forgotten data archive at the Goldstone Deep Space Complex, a technician uncovered a single electromagnetic pulse embedded within one of Voyager 2's older transmissions. It had been dismissed as static for years, but when reconstructed in real time, the pulse revealed an anomaly, a compression of data so dense it behaved like a temporal singularity, a command buried within time itself. Scientists attempted to simulate it on isolated hardware. What happened defied physics. CPUs began processing data before the commands were issued. Outputs appeared with no logical inputs. It was as if the pulse had rewritten the system's understanding of time. Something, or someone, had embedded a temporal instruction into the transmission, one that could warp causality. And if machines could be affected, what about human cognition? Were our thoughts safe? Or had the countdown already begun the moment we pressed play? Until now, all attention had focused on Voyager 2 as the lone protagonist of this deep space mystery. But a Hungarian astronomer, analyzing cosmic background radiation, detected a faint duplication of the probe's signal, not an echo, but a mirror. And it wasn't coming from Voyager. It was arriving from interstellar space, beyond our solar system, at an angle inconsistent with any known trajectory. A second transmitter, one no agency claimed, one that predated our recordings. When cross-referenced with historical data, this ghost signal contained slight deviations, anomalies that described events that hadn't yet occurred. Earthquakes, satellite failures, atmospheric disturbances. It was a timeline not our own, another version of Earth, another chain of events, another Voyager. But in this version, the probe never stopped transmitting. It returned home, and it wasn't alone. And then, finally, came the image. Captured by a thermal infrared telescope designed for near-solar observations, the photograph showed a cold object drifting silently along Voyager 2's trajectory. At first dismissed as a rogue asteroid, its behavior quickly drew suspicion. It wasn't tumbling, it wasn't spinning, and most critically, it adjusted its position in real time, based on our transmissions. It was reacting to us. The object's surface reflected no visible light, its contours smooth and deliberate, as if engineered with a purpose unknown. It exhibited fractal symmetry, a sign of biomechanical origin. No visible propulsion, no energy signature. Yet it moved with precision, like a predator tracking prey. Radar pings confirmed its destination, a Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon. And then it stopped, hovering, watching, waiting, as if to say, the message has been delivered. And now, it's our move. So now we face the unthinkable. What if Voyager 2 was never just a machine drifting through the cold dark for science and wonder? What if, unknowingly, we launched not just a probe, but a beacon, a signal that pierced the stillness of the void and echoed into the places we weren't meant to touch? The kind of places that don't forget. Because everything, the distorted code, the artificial biosequences, the anomalous pulses that bend time, the second transmitter from a different version of reality, and that silent object watching from the shadows, it all points to one terrifying truth. Someone answered. Or perhaps, they were already listening, waiting. And maybe the reason Voyager 2's final signal sounds more like a warning than a discovery is because it is. Maybe the countdown already started, not when the probe was launched, but when we dared to listen, when we tried to decode a language that was never meant for human minds, when we opened the door and forgot to ask what might come through. Now, every telescope is watching the skies. Every deep space antenna is calibrated, every satellite reconfigured. But the question no one dares to ask in public is the one that haunts every darkened lab and every sleepless scientist across the globe. What if the message wasn't meant for us to receive, but to activate us? What if we're no longer just observers of the cosmos, but participants in something far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous than we ever imagined? And if that's true, then this story is far from over. In fact, it may have just begun.